a princess was practically kidnapped and forced to marry her country's conqueror, all in the name of stopping more bloodshed. Another royal wedding made a foreign king the heir to an entire kingdom, totally sidelining the prince who was actually supposed to inherit. And can you believe one queen got her new husband and his whole kingdom to switch religions, a move that echoed for centuries? Then there were the teenage sweethearts, who married in secret, risking it all to bring their warring lands together. But sometimes, even a treaty of perpetual peace sealed with a royal wedding couldn't stop war from erupting again, like when a queen's own brother invaded her husband's kingdom barely a decade later. And picture this, a brilliant young empress, journeying from a legendary, far-off empire, bringing not just a dowry, but a whole cultural upgrade to her new, less polished home. Get ready, because these medieval peace deals made with I do's were anything but fairy tales. Number 6. Anne of Brittany, the duchess who married 2 French kings to save her land, sort of. Picture this. You're a young duchess, just a girl really, and your small, independent country is being eyed by a huge, powerful neighbor. That was Anne of Brittany. Her dad, Duke Francis II, only had daughters, and in medieval times, that often meant trouble. Brittany was a proud land, with its own language and customs, and it desperately wanted to stay free from France. When Anne was just 11 years old, her father died in 1488. Suddenly, she was Duchess Anne, ruler of Brittany, and a massive target. The King of France, Charles VIII, saw his chance. He wanted Brittany badly. Anne and her advisors tried everything to keep Brittany independent. They looked for strong allies. Anne was even married by proxy. That's like getting married without the groom being there, to Maximilian I, the King of the Romans, who later became Holy Roman Emperor. He was a powerful guy, and Brittany hoped this marriage would scare France off. It didn't. Charles VIII wasn't playing. He marched his army into Brittany. His forces besieged Rennes, the city where Anne was. Imagine being trapped, your people starving, your supposed powerful husband by proxy miles away and not sending enough help. What do you do? Anne, now around 14 years old, had to make an impossible choice. To save her duchy from being completely crushed, she agreed to marry Charles VIII in 1491. There was a huge catch. Her marriage to Maximilian had to be annulled. The Pope eventually agreed, probably because France was a bit more persuasive than a distant duchess. So, Anne of Brittany married King Charles VIII of France. The wedding itself was rushed almost secret to happen before Maximilian could properly object or intervene. The marriage contract was a tough pill for Brittany to swallow. It said that if Charles died without a son, Anne had to marry his successor. Yes, you read that right. She was contractually obliged to marry the next French king. It also said that the spouse who outlived the other would keep Brittany. But if Anne died childless, Brittany would go to the French crown. Talk about pressure to produce an heir. Life as Queen of France wasn't easy. Anne was intelligent and proud of her Breton heritage. She tried to maintain Brittany's distinct identity. She and Charles had several children, but tragically, none of them survived early childhood. This was a personal heartbreak and a political disaster. No heir meant that nasty clause in the marriage contract was still hanging over her head. Then in 1498, Charles VIII, still young, died in a bizarre accident. He hit his head on a door lintel. Just like that. Anne was a widow, and, according to the contract, she was supposed to marry the new King of France, Louis XII. Louis XII was Charles VIII's cousin, and guess what? He was already married to Joan of France, a woman he reportedly found unattractive and had been trying to get rid of for years. Now, with Anne in the picture and the chance to secure Brittany, Louis XII suddenly found very strong reasons to get his marriage to Joan annulled. He claimed he'd been forced into it, and that it was never consummated. The Pope again sided with the powerful French king. Joan was packed off to a convent. So, in 1499, Anne of Brittany, for the second time, married the King of France. This time, the marriage contract was a bit better for Brittany. Anne negotiated hard. She ensured that her second son or daughter, if there were no sons, would inherit Brittany, not the French crown directly, trying to keep a line of succession separate. She also made sure that Louis XII was crowned Duke of Brittany, recognizing its distinct status. Anne and Louis XII seemed to have a more functional marriage. They had two daughters who survived to adulthood, Claude and Renée. Claude eventually married Francis, who would become the next King of France, Francis I. This marriage once again pulled Brittany closer to the French crown. Anne herself died in 1514, still relatively young, at 36 or 37. She was a formidable woman who spent her life trying to navigate impossible political waters to protect her homeland. Did her marriages bring peace? Well, they stopped the immediate wars between France and Brittany. But they also led to Brittany being slowly but surely absorbed into France. After Anne's death, and through her daughter Claude's marriage, Brittany officially became part of France in 1532. So the peace came at the cost of Breton independence. Anne, the fiercely proud duchess, became a symbol of that lost independence, a queen twice over, whose life was a constant battle of diplomacy, marriage contracts, and trying to outmaneuver kings. Not exactly a fairy tale, but definitely a story of a woman trying to make the best of a really, really tough situation. Number 5. Catherine of Valois and Henry V, the marriage that was supposed to end the 100 Years' War. Border. It didn't. Okay, so picture this. England and France have been beating each other up for like 100 years. It's called the 100 Years' War for a reason, and everyone is exhausted. Cities are wrecked, people are dead, and the whole thing is a giant, bloody mess. Enter King Henry V of England. He's young, he's ambitious, and he's just won a massive, almost unbelievable victory at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. France is in chaos. Their king, Charles VI, suffered from bouts of severe mental illness. Sometimes he thought he was made of glass and would break seriously. This made ruling France, or negotiating peace, incredibly difficult. Henry V saw his chance not just for peace, but for the ultimate prize, the French crown itself. How do you seal a deal that big? With a marriage, of course. The bride-to-be was Catherine of Valois, the youngest daughter of the very unwell French king Charles VI and his powerful and somewhat notorious wife, Isabella of Bavaria. Catherine was said to be beautiful. When Henry first started negotiating for her hand, even before Agincourt, he demanded a huge dowry and large chunks of French territory. The French, understandably, said no way. So, Henry invaded. After Agincourt, his bargaining position was a lot stronger. The negotiations that followed led to something called the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. This treaty was absolutely bonkers. It said that Henry V would marry Catherine of Valois. Okay, standard stuff. But then it said Henry V and his future sons with Catherine would become the heirs to the French throne. It completely disinherited Charles VI's own son, the Dauphin Charles, later Charles VII. Can you imagine? Your dad signing away your inheritance to the guy who just invaded your country. Ouch. The treaty basically said Henry V would rule France as regent until poor King Charles VI died. And then Henry, or his son, would be king of both England and France, a dual monarchy. Peace at last, right? Through one epic marriage. So, Henry V married Catherine of Valois on June 2nd, 1420, in Troyes Cathedral. She was about 18. He was about 33. We don't know much about what Catherine thought of all this. She was a princess, and princesses did what they were told, especially when massive armies were involved. By all accounts, Henry was quite taken with her. He even learned some French phrases to woo her. Catherine was crowned Queen of England in Westminster Abbey in 1421. She gave birth to a son, Henry, the future Henry VI, later that year. Everything seemed to be going according to Henry V's grand plan. He was conquering more of France. His wife had given him an heir to both kingdoms. Peace through English domination seemed within reach, but then disaster. In 1422, Henry V, the mighty warrior king, died suddenly of dysentery while on campaign in France. He was only 35. Just like that, the strong hand guiding this whole audacious plan was gone. His son, baby Henry VI, was less than a year old. 2 months later, Catherine's father, Charles VI of France, also died. So now, a baby was technically King of England, and, according to the Treaty of Troyes, King of France too. This was complicated. The disinherited Dauphin Charles wasn't just going to roll over and accept this. He still had supporters in France, and he declared himself King Charles VII. The peace brought by the Treaty of Troyes and the marriage of Henry and Catherine. It pretty much died with Henry V. The 100 Years' War flared up again with a vengeance. The English tried to hold on to their French territories and claim the French crown for baby Henry VI, but they faced a resurgent French force, famously inspired by Joan of Arc, who supported Charles VII. What about Catherine? She was a young widow, the Dowager Queen of England, mother to the infant king. She was kept under close watch. But Catherine had a secret. After Henry V's death, she fell in love with a Welshman named Owen Tudor. He was part of her household staff, handsome, but definitely not considered a suitable match for a queen dowager. They married in secret, or at least had a relationship that produced children, and had several kids. This was a huge scandal when it eventually came out. One of their sons, Edmund Tudor, would later marry Margaret Beaufort. And their son became King Henry VII, the first Tudor king of England who actually did bring a different kind of peace to England after the Wars of the Roses. So, in a roundabout way, Catherine's second, very unpolitical secret marriage had massive historical consequences. Catherine herself didn't live to see all that. She died in 1437, still relatively young, after retiring to Bermondsey Abbey. Her marriage to Henry V was meant to unite two kingdoms and end a terrible war. Instead, it led to more conflict and a baby king ruling over a divided realm. But her legacy, through her unexpected second family, ended up shaping English history in ways no one could have predicted. Talk about a dramatic life. Number 4. Theophanu and Otto II, the Byzantine princess who dazzled the barbarian West. Let's rewind to the 10th century. Europe is a patchwork of kingdoms. The big players are the Holy Roman Empire in the West. Think Germany and parts of Italy, and the super-ancient, super-sophisticated Byzantine Empire in the East, the continuation of the Roman Empire based in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. These two empires were kind of rivals, kind of frenemies. Otto I, the Holy Roman Emperor, was a powerful dude. He wanted to legitimize his relatively new empire, and maybe even get some Byzantine territories in Italy. What's a good way to make nice and show you're a big deal? Marry into the oldest, most prestigious royal family in Christendom. He wanted a Byzantine princess, a Porphyrogenita, born in the purple, meaning born to a reigning emperor in a special palace chamber, for his son, also named Otto, Otto II. This was a huge deal. The Byzantines considered themselves the true Roman emperors and often looked down on the Western barbarians. Sending a princess to marry one was a massive diplomatic chess move. After years of tough negotiations, where Otto I's first envoy was basically treated like dirt and even imprisoned by the Byzantine Emperor Nikephoros II Phocas, things changed. Nikephoros was murdered, Byzantine politics were wild, and his successor, John I Tzimiskes, was more open to an alliance. He agreed to send a princess. But here's a bit of drama. The princess who arrived in 972 wasn't exactly who Otto I was expecting. He probably hoped for a daughter of the previous legitimate emperor. Theophanu, the chosen bride, was John Tzimiskes' niece, or possibly some other close relative. Sources are a bit murky. She was young, probably around 12 to 16 years old. Some in the West grumbled that she wasn't born in the purple enough. Despite any grumbles, the wedding went ahead. Theophanu married Otto II in Rome in a lavish ceremony conducted by the Pope himself on April 14, 972. She was crowned empress alongside her husband. Imagine Theophanu. She came from Constantinople, a city of incredible wealth, art, learning, and ancient traditions. She arrived in the Ottonian court, which, while powerful, was probably a bit more rustic by comparison. She brought with her a retinue of Byzantine scholars, artisans, and clergy. She brought new fashions, new foods, like the fork, supposedly, and new ideas. She wasn't just a pretty face or a political token. Theophanu was highly educated, intelligent, and politically savvy. She quickly learned German and Latin. She actively participated in government alongside Otto II. Her name appears on many official documents, sometimes even as co-empress or consors imperii, partner in rule, which was a big deal for a woman in the West at that time. Did the marriage bring peace or the desired alliance? It did ease tensions between the two empires for a while. It also brought a huge cultural infusion into the Ottonian court, and by extension, Western Europe. This Ottonian Renaissance saw a flowering of art, architecture, and learning, partly inspired by Byzantine influences that Theophanu helped introduce. Otto II and Theophanu seemed to have a genuinely close relationship. They had at least 5 children, including their son Otto III, who would become emperor, and 3 daughters who became powerful abbesses or married into other noble families. But then, as often happens in these medieval stories, tragedy struck. Otto II died young, at just 28, in 983 from malaria while campaigning in Italy. Their son, Otto III, was only 3 years old. This could have been a disaster. A child emperor, a foreign-born empress dowager, it was a recipe for chaos and rebellion. But Theophanu stepped up. Big time. She became regent for her young son, and she was brilliant at it. She faced down rebellions from ambitious relatives, like Henry the Quarrelsome, great name. She skillfully navigated the complex politics of the Holy Roman Empire, using diplomacy and, when necessary, force. She continued to issue charters and decrees in her own name and alongside her son. She even led armies. This woman was a powerhouse. She maintained contact with Byzantium, ensuring good relations, and managed the empire effectively. She essentially ruled the Holy Roman Empire for about 7 years, until her own death in 991, when she was still only in her mid-30s. She made sure her son, Otto III, was well educated and prepared to rule. He actually had grand ideas of renewing the Roman Empire, partly inspired by his Byzantine heritage through his mother. Theophanu's influence was immense. She wasn't just a peace bride. She was a cultural bridge and a remarkable ruler in her own right. She showed the barbarian West what a sophisticated, educated empress could do. She helped stabilize and shape the Holy Roman Empire at a critical time. Not bad for a teenage princess, who some initially sniffed at for not being fancy enough. She proved them all wrong. Number 3. Margaret Tudor and James IV of Scotland, the marriage of the thistle and the rose that promised perpetual peace. Okay, England and Scotland. For centuries, these two neighbors had a relationship that was, let's say, a bit spiky. Think constant border, raids, invasions, and general bad blood. It was exhausting. At the beginning of the 16th century, King Henry VII of England was a clever, peace-loving, mostly because war was expensive, kind of guy. He'd won the Wars of the Roses and united England. Now he wanted to secure his dynasty and his borders. One of the biggest thorns in his side was Scotland, which often allied with England's enemy, France. Henry VII had a plan, a good old-fashioned marriage alliance. He proposed to marry his eldest daughter, Margaret Tudor, to King James IV of Scotland. James IV was a Mhaidach, cultured, and popular king, a true Renaissance monarch. He was also known for his romantic adventures, but politically, he was a key figure. The negotiations were long and careful. Finally, in 1502, they signed the Treaty of Perpetual Peace. Yes, perpetual peace. That's a pretty bold claim for any treaty, especially between England and Scotland. The centerpiece of this treaty was the marriage. Margaret Tudor, who was only 12 at the time of the treaty, the marriage happened a year later when she was 13, was to become Queen of Scotland. James IV was about 30. Margaret's journey north to Scotland in 1503 was a massive affair, a huge glittering procession designed to impress the Scots and show off English wealth and power. She was a princess of the powerful Tudor dynasty, sister to the future Henry VIII. Her emblem was the rose for the Tudors, and James's was the thistle for Scotland. So this was dubbed the marriage of the thistle and the rose. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? James IV seemed genuinely pleased with his young bride. He showered her with gifts and attention. Margaret, for her part, was now a queen in a foreign, sometimes unwelcoming, land. It must have been a lot for a young teenager. She was known for her style and her strong will, much like her famous brother. For a while, the perpetual peace actually held. There was relative calm between England and Scotland. Margaret and James had several children, though many died young, a common tragedy in those times. Their son, the future James V of Scotland, survived. But perpetual is a long time. Things started to unravel after Margaret's father, Henry VII, died in 1509. Her brother, the young, ambitious, and much more warlike Henry VIII, became King of England. Henry VIII wasn't as keen on peaceful diplomacy as his dad. Tensions mounted. Scotland had a long-standing alliance with France, called the Auld Alliance. When Henry VIII went to war with France, James IV was in a tough spot. He had a treaty with England, but he also had a treaty with France. France called for his help. James IV, honoring the Old Alliance, decided to invade England in 1513. This was a disaster for the perpetual peace. It had lasted barely a decade. Margaret, as Queen of Scotland and sister of the English king, was in an incredibly difficult position. Imagine your husband going to war against your brother. Awkward family dinners, to say the least. The Scottish invasion ended catastrophically at the Battle of Flodden in September 1513. The Scottish army was crushed, and King James IV himself was killed on the battlefield. It was a devastating blow for Scotland. Suddenly, Margaret Tudor was a widow. Her young son, James V, was now King of Scots, and she was appointed regent. She was just 23 years old. This was her moment to try and navigate the treacherous waters of Scottish politics, caught between her duty to her son and her homeland, and her connections to England. Her regency was chaotic. Scottish nobles were a notoriously unruly bunch. And then, less than a year after James IV's death, Margaret made a controversial move. She secretly married Archibald Douglas, 6th Earl of Angus, a powerful but divisive Scottish nobleman. This marriage cost her the regency, as Scottish lords weren't thrilled about an English-born queen marrying into one faction of the nobility. What followed for Margaret was years of political struggle, switching allegiances, being exiled, returning, and constantly fighting for her son's rights and her own position. She even had to flee to England at one point, seeking refuge with her brother Henry VIII. Her relationship with Henry was complicated. He supported her when it suited him, but didn't always trust her. Margaret later divorced Angus, which was a whole saga in itself, requiring papal annulment, and married another Scottish lord, Henry Stuart, Lord Methven. Her life was incredibly dramatic, full of political intrigue, personal passions, and constant instability. The marriage of the thistle and the rose, intended to bring lasting peace, ultimately failed in the short term, spectacularly so, with the disaster at Flodden. However, it had a massive long-term consequence that Henry VII probably dreamed of. A century later, in 1603, when Margaret's formidable niece, Queen Elizabeth I of England, Henry VIII's daughter, died without children, the English crown passed to Margaret's great-grandson, James VI of Scotland. He became James I of England, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. So while the Perpetual Peace Treaty was a bit of a flop, the marriage eventually led to the very union of the two kingdoms it was supposed to foster. It just took 100 years, a lot of drama, and a very different route than anyone expected. Margaret Tudor's life shows that even when peace plans go sideways, royal bloodlines have a funny way of changing history. Number 2. Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, the power couple, who secretly married to unite Spain. Let's talk about a real medieval power couple, the ones who basically created Spain as we know it. Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. Their marriage wasn't just about stopping a war between their kingdoms. It was about forging a single, powerful Christian kingdom out of a deeply divided Iberian peninsula. In the mid-15th century, what we now call Spain was a collection of different kingdoms. The two biggest Christian ones were Castile, large, central, but often politically unstable, and Aragon, smaller, more focused on Mediterranean trade, also including Catalonia and Valencia. There was also Portugal, Navarre, and importantly, the Muslim Emirate of Granada in the south, the last remnant of centuries of Moorish rule in Iberia. Isabella was the half-sister of King Henry IV of Castile. Henry IV's reign was a bit of a mess, with nobles constantly challenging his authority. His own daughter Juana was rumored to be illegitimate, nicknamed La Beltronella, after a nobleman suspected of being her real father. This made Isabella a really strong contender for the throne of Castile. She was smart, deeply religious, and incredibly determined. Powerful men wanted to marry her to gain control of Castile. Ferdinand was the heir to the throne of Aragon. He was known for being clever, a skilled diplomat, and a capable military leader. A marriage between Isabella and Ferdinand seemed like a natural fit. It would unite the two largest Christian kingdoms and create a formidable force. But it wasn't simple. Isabella's brother, King Henry IV, wanted her to marry someone else, someone he could control, like the King of Portugal or a French duke. Isabella had other ideas. She saw Ferdinand as the best partner to achieve her ambitions for Castile and for a united Christian Spain. So, what did they do? They decided to get married in secret, or at least against King Henry IV's explicit wishes. This was risky stuff. Isabella was about 18, Ferdinand about 17. In 1469, Ferdinand traveled to Castile in disguise, pretending to be a merchant servant to avoid detection by Henry IV's spies. That's some serious commitment. They met in Valladolid and were married on October 19, 1469. There was a slight hiccup. They were second cousins, so they needed permission from the Pope to marry. They didn't have it yet. So, a forged papal bull, an official document from the Pope authorizing the marriage, was, conveniently, produced. The real one came later. Talk about starting your marriage with a bit of rebellious paperwork. When King Henry IV found out, he was furious. He declared Isabella's claim to the throne void and reaffirmed his daughter Juana as his heir. This set the stage for a civil war. When Henry IV died in 1474, Isabella immediately proclaimed herself Queen of Castile. Supporters of Juana, backed by Portugal, disputed this, leading to the War of the Castilian Succession. Ferdinand, now King of Aragon as well, his father died in 1479, fought alongside Isabella. Together, they were a formidable team. Isabella was a hands-on queen, often traveling with her troops, organizing supplies and inspiring loyalty. Ferdinand was the military strategist. They eventually won the war in 1479, securing Isabella's place as Queen of Castile and Ferdinand as her king consort, though in practice they ruled jointly in many respects, so much so they were known as the Catholic monarchs. Their marriage wasn't just a personal union. It was the foundation of a unified Spain. Their motto was, Tanto monta, monta tanto, Isabel come Fernando, meaning they amount to the same Isabella as much as Ferdinand, signifying their equal partnership, though Castile and Aragon technically remained separate kingdoms with their own laws and institutions for a long time. With their thrones secure, Isabella and Ferdinand turned their attention to their other big goals. One was completing the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to retake the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. In 1492, after a long siege, they conquered Granada, the last Muslim stronghold. This was a massive symbolic victory. Year 1492 was a busy year for them. It was also the year they issued the Alhambra Decree, ordering the expulsion of all practicing Jews from Spain. This was a brutal move that had devastating economic and social consequences, but for them, it was part of creating a religiously unified Catholic Spain. And famously, it was the year Isabella agreed to fund Christopher Columbus's voyage west, which led to the European arrival in the Americas. Ferdinand was initially skeptical, but eventually went along. Their joint reign transformed Spain. They centralized power, reformed the government and finances, curbed the power of unruly nobles, and established Spain as a major European power. They used the Spanish Inquisition, established earlier but heavily promoted by them, to enforce religious uniformity. Their marriage, born of youthful determination and a bit of defiance, literally redrew the map of Spain and set the stage for its global empire. They faced immense challenges from civil war to international politics, but their partnership held strong. They had several children, including Joanna, often called the Mad, whose own marriage would link Spain to the powerful Habsburg dynasty, and Catherine of Aragon, who would become the first wife of Henry VIII of England, Margaret Tudor's brother. Isabella died in 1504, and Ferdinand ruled as regent of Castile for a time before his own death in 1516. Their legacy is complex and controversial, especially regarding religious persecution. But there's no denying that their marriage was one of the most consequential in European history, a true forging of a nation through a powerful personal and political alliance, all started with a secret wedding and a dodgy papal document. Number 1. Clotilde and Clovis I, the queen who converted a king and forged a Frankish kingdom. Way back, like late 5th century AD. The Western Roman Empire had crumbled. Europe was a chaotic free for all of migrating tribes, warlords, and fledgling kingdoms. One of these groups was the Franks, a collection of Germanic tribes living near the Rhine River. And their rising star was a fierce young king named Clovis I. Clovis was ambitious, ruthless, and a pagan. He believed in the old Germanic gods like Woden and Thor. He was busy conquering his neighbors and carving out a kingdom for himself in what used to be Roman Gaul, modern-day France and parts of Germany. Now, enter Clotilde. She was a Burgundian princess. The Burgundians were another Germanic tribe, neighbors to the Franks, and they were mostly Arian Christians. Arianism was a form of Christianity considered heretical by the mainstream Nicene Christians, what would become Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Clotilde, however, was a devout Nicene Christian, possibly converted by bishops in her homeland. Her family situation was pretty grim. Her father, the Burgundian king, Chilperic II, had been murdered by his own brother, Gundobad, who then took over the Burgundian throne. So, Clotilde was living in the court of her father's killer. Talk about an awkward family dynamic. Clovis, looking to expand his power and influence, saw an opportunity. Marrying Clotilde could give him a claim, or at least an inroad into Burgundian affairs. Plus, an alliance with a Christian princess might help him deal with the Gallo-Roman population he was conquering, most of whom were Nicene Christians. So, around 493 AD, Clovis asked Gundobad for Clotilde's hand in marriage. Gundobad, perhaps fearing Clovis, or seeing some advantage, agreed. Clotilde, probably eager to get away from her uncle/father's murderer, married Clovis. She was now queen to a powerful pagan king. And she had a mission: to convert her husband. This wasn't just about personal faith. If Clovis converted to Nicene Christianity, it would be a massive political win. It would align him with the influential Gallo-Roman bishops and the majority of the population in Gaul. It would give him a powerful ideological tool for unifying his growing kingdom and legitimize his rule in the eyes of the old Roman world. It would also set him apart from other Germanic kings, many of whom were Arians and thus viewed with suspicion by the Nicene Gallo-Romans. Clotilde worked on Clovis. She talked to him about her God. According to Gregory of Tours, the main historian for this period, writing a bit later but still our best source, Clovis was hesitant. Their first son was baptized a Christian at Clotilde's insistence, but the baby died shortly after. Clovis supposedly blamed Clotilde's God super awkward. Their second son, Chlodomer, also fell ill after being baptized, but Clotilde prayed and he recovered. Clovis was still not convinced. The turning point, legend has it, came during a desperate battle against another Germanic tribe, the Alemanni, around 496 AD, though some historians place it later, around 506 AD. Clovis's Frankish warriors were losing badly. He was in deep trouble. In his moment of desperation, Clovis supposedly prayed to Clotilde's God, promising to convert if he won. "Oh, Jesus Christ," he reportedly cried out, "you who Clotilde affirms to be the Son of the living God, I devoutly beseech your glorious aid. If you will grant me victory over these enemies, I will believe in you and be baptized in your name." Miraculously, or so the story goes, the tide of the battle turned. The Alemanni king was killed and his army fled. Clovis had won. True to his word, and probably also seeing the massive political advantages, Clovis agreed to be baptized. Around Christmas Day, possibly in 496 AD or a few years later, Clovis, along with thousands of his Frankish warriors, was baptized by Bishop Remigius of Reims. The bishop famously said, "Bow your head, proud Sicamber," an old name for a Frankish tribe. "Adore what you have burned, burn what you have adored." This was Huge. Clovis, becoming a Nicene Christian rather than an Arian Christian, like many other Germanic rulers, was a game-changer. It meant the Franks would be the champions of mainstream Western Christianity. It paved the way for a close alliance between the Frankish kings and the papacy in Rome for centuries to come. It helped to meld the Frankish warrior culture with Gallo-Roman Christian civilization, laying the foundations for what would eventually become France, and in many ways Western Europe. Clotilde's role in this was crucial. She didn't just passively pray. She actively evangelized her husband, and through him, his kingdom. Her marriage wasn't just a political alliance. It was a religious and cultural turning point. After his conversion, Clovis continued his conquests, often framed as wars against heretics, like the Arian Visigoths, or pagans. He united almost all the Frankish tribes under his rule and established Paris as his capital. He created the Merovingian dynasty, which would rule the Franks for over 200 years. Clotilde outlived Clovis. After he died in 511 AD, she retired to a monastery in Tours, but remained influential. She saw her sons fight amongst themselves for control of the kingdom, which must have been heartbreaking. But her legacy was secure. She was later venerated as a saint for her role in converting Clovis and establishing Christianity among the Franks. Her marriage to Clovis is a prime example of how a dynastic union, intended perhaps for political peace or advantage between two tribes, could have earth-shattering religious and cultural consequences that shaped the destiny of a continent. all thanks to a determined queen who believed in her faith and wasn't afraid to challenge a formidable pagan king.